Hello again, everybody, and welcome to our discussion. Today I'm going to try something a little bit different. In the past, a lot of my presentations have focused on working with the data in SPSS. This time, however, I want to show some way that SPSS can be used that we haven't touched on, which is actually importing data into it. Now, all the examples that we've used in some of the past presentations have all been based on data that was already publicly available, for example, the General Social Survey or the Uniform Crime Report data. Now, you can see up on the screen right now, I've got something a little bit different, which is I actually have the Notepad app open. And you can see on it some text data. It's got the name of the city. These are the most populous cities in the country. There's only 10 of them here. I just wanted to make this a simple enough example. But we might run into a situation where we want to be able to take data that isn't already in an SPSS format and import it into the program in a way that could be useful for us. So you can see here we've actually got a couple of variables. And looking at it, I would say there's three pieces of information that we can get from each row. One is the name of the city. The second is the name of the state, as represented by the two-digit string code. And then finally, you can see for each one, they've actually got a population listed. And what I want to do is I want to be able to bring this into SPSS in a way that would allow me then to, one, be able to identify the name of the city as well as the name of the state, and also then incorporate that population value as a numeric value that I might potentially want to do some sort of calculation on later on. And in some of the future presentations, we'll get into discussions, things like the merge variable, where we could potentially even add more variables to this data if we wanted to. So for the moment, I'm going to move away from this data file because we're going to try and open this up inside of SPSS. So I'm simply going to close this. And instead, I saved it on my desktop. So I'm going to say File. Now, I could go a couple different ways. I could try to open it as a data file, which is a text file, but you can see the SPSS actually has a very simple text function here, which says simply read text data. So I'm going to click that, and you're going to see right away the default is to be on my desktop, and I've got the file right here, data.txt. I'm going to say open. Now, this doesn't open nice and neat like our SPSS files in the past have opened because the program isn't 100% sure what to do with it. And so it's demonstrating to you its best guess in terms of what it is that it thinks you should want to do with this. Now, it starts off by asking us if our data is in a predefined format. And in this case, it's not because we haven't worked with this data before. And so you can see down at the bottom, we have a next function. So the default is no. So let's move to next. Now, there are two types of way the variables can be arranged. One is delimited and the other is fixed width. Now, fixed width would be everything falls, all the variables start and end on the same set of columns. Now, the other is delimited, which means that there's some sort of different way that a new variable is being indicated. You might have seen in other discussions something called comma delimited files, where variables or cases of information are separated by commas. In this case, we're going to say delimited because our data isn't quite that clean, but we are going to be able to sort of go through and make some changes to make this useful. So I'm going to leave it on delimited. Now, the next thing it asks us, excuse me, is whether or not our variable names are included at the top of the file. We can see right away that they're not. That wasn't necessary for the way the file was originally set up, which was just copy and pasted off a web page. So we're going to make sure that it stays on the default of no, and we're going to hit next. Now, the program wants to know, does the data start on line 1, or is there some extraneous information we don't need? In this case, it starts on 1, so we'll leave it at that. Each line is representing its own case. There are times when our data might have several rows to it, and we would tell the program to treat it accordingly. And then finally, it wants to know if we're going to do all the data or only some of it. In this case, we've only got the 10 cases, so let's just leave it on all, and I'm going to hit next again. Now, you can see that the program has tried its best guess at reading the data, and it's kind of a mess. It's made the assumption that the comma and the space, so an individual space, are going to be indicators of a new variable. Now, the comma is actually right, because you might remember the city and the state name are separated by a comma, but the space is a problem, because you could see from the names like San Antonio or San Diego, where it's literally the city name has a space in it, it's thrown this all off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off that space function. And suddenly things get a little bit cleaner, but I'm going to drag this out a little bit so we can see it. But you can see that it's still kept everything sort of together in one place. Not exactly the most helpful. Now, you can see there are other options like a semicolon and tab, but since there are no semicolons or tabs in here, we shouldn't be surprised by the fact that nothing happens. Now, on the other hand, what I can do is I'm going to tell the program other. And looking again at the values being reported here, we can see a couple of things. One, we can see that we've got the open parens before population. So we could find a very simple way to tell the program that we don't, or we can separate these out into separate columns. So what I'm actually going to do is put that open parens. And now look what happens very nicely here. Our city and our state have their own columns. Population's still a little bit messy, but this is actually something we're going to be able to clear up in the program. Now, unfortunately, if I hit space here inside that other box, I end up with a little bit of a problem because it thinks I'm trying to tell it space is important. But again, looking at this values, you can see that we have a colon in here. So if I enter a colon, it opens it up again. And now population has become its own variable. And we can go even a step further because we really don't want the end of the parens. And so if I add that as well, you can see that suddenly our data has become much more manageable. Now the truth, by the way, is we don't even need that third column, right? That V3. But for the moment, it's easier for us to move forward with it. And I'm going to hit next here and then clean it up afterwards. So I'm going to say next. And now the program is trying to figure out how to treat the data. It knows that based on what's been entered here, which are names, that it's a string variable, hence the data format. It's given it a name just based on the order, so variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, variable 4, going from left to right. And if we click each column, you can see that it's basically just doing its best estimate of what's going on. Again, variables 1 through 3 are all string. Variable 4, however, because there's only numeric information there, it's going to treat as numeric. So for the moment, I'm not going to worry too much about this, but let's make a couple of very quick edits here. So instead of calling this variable 1, I'm going to tell it to call it city. Instead of variable 2, I'm going to tell it to call it state. And again, I'm going to ignore variable 3 because we're going to get rid of it. But for variable 4, I'm going to call that population. And you can see that once I've clicked off, the names have been changed here. I'm going to say next again. And the program asks one final set of commands. Do I want to save this file format for future? Look, the truth is, based on the fact that I download this from a web page, it's extremely unlikely I'm going to run into this exact same file format again, so I probably won't save it. But on the other hand, if I am doing repetitive work or redundant work where I'm getting the same set of files from different sources, or the same source rather, at different points in time, I might want to save the format to make my life a little bit simpler. Do I want to paste the syntax? No, we're not going to worry about that today. And then we can cache the data locally. So with that in mind, let's simply hit finish. And lo and behold, we have ended up now with some information that we can actually take a look at. We have a variable of city, a variable of state, a variable of the word population, which we'll deal with that in just a second, and then an actual population value. Now what I can do here very quickly is I can left mouse click on variable 3, right mouse click on variable 3, hit clear, and lo and behold, I've gotten rid of that variable. And so now I simply have my city, my state, and my population variables all together in one place. I've taken information from the web, which yes, it had some data structure to it, but I've used the software to find a very simple way to now move this into an SPSS file, where I could, if I had more information available, even start some data analysis if I thought it was appropriate. Now again, this isn't meant to be exhaustive, and certainly I gave myself a very easy example here to work with, But in part, this is demonstrate the fact that the software can work with data which may not be already in an SPSS format. And by the way, again, we don't talk about this very much, but if you go under File, Open, and Data, one of the things that you can see is that SPSS can open up a lot of different files. Text, other programs like Stata or SAS, Excel, Lotus. I'm not even sure Lotus is used very much anymore. But all of these different types of files can be opened up into SPSS, making it a little bit easier for us to take already structured data and put it in a format that SPSS can read and that we can then do some analysis on. I know this has been a bit of a short presentation, but again, just sort of demonstrating some of the things that we can do in SPSS that we don't generally take a lot of time to talk about. Have a great day.